You'll forgive me if I have my back to you for a minute while I introduce the session. Welcome to the final session. We've got until 5:45 with some very busy people and a good panel, but this is your session as much as it's their session, and I hope we're going to have a lot of contributions and a lot of interaction in this session. So let me tell you what the rules are and what I think the exam question is. We've had a lot of discussion about post-2015 in the last 2 days, including in a very good opening panel, at which, of course, the President spoke, as did the Commissioner. So what's left to do? We could talk about why we want to have a post-2015 framework. But it seems to me we've answered that question because we know how useful the MDGs were as a framework. But I'm going to ask you in a second whether you want to discuss that question. We could discuss when, but we know that we have to have an agreement by September 2015 for the General Assembly, and on the climate side by November, December 2015 at the COP in Paris. We could discuss what. And there are some interesting questions about the unified agenda, the universal agenda, and how we deal with some very difficult issues, climate, finance, and the other topics that come under the heading of means of implementation. And then we can discuss what seems to me to be a question that we haven't discussed very much, but is really difficult, which is the question of how. How do we get from where we are today to a deal in 2015? And one way of asking that question, but this is maybe a very male way of asking it, is whose arms do we have to break in order to get a deal? So I might ask that question to the men on the panel, but the women on the panel will have a different way of dealing with the problem, which is more collaborative and more consensual. So we might ask them, but you can break somebody's arm if you'd like to. So first of all, I want to know who's in the room. Please put up your hand if you work for the Commission. Please put up your hand if you work for a member state. Please put up your hand if you are an academic, a researcher, or an NGO. Very good. So we have quite a good balance of people. And now, please put up your hand if you're under 30. So we want to make sure we also hear the voices of the youth ambassadors and the under 30s. Personally, I'm 65, and I think nobody under the age of 64 and a half should be allowed to vote, but I understand that is a minority view. Now, let me test you on the 4 questions. Put up your hand if you disagree with the statement that it is useful to have a post-2015 framework. Very good, 100%. That's the right answer. You're doing very well. I'm not going to ask you about the timetable because that's very clear. Now, put up your hand if you disagree with the idea that the poverty and sustainable development goals, the environmental goals, should be brought together. Does anybody disagree with that statement? Okay, very good. And finally, put up your hand if you think it's going to be difficult to get an agreement in post-2015. And finally, put up your hand if you think if it's a good idea to have a universal agenda which links both rich and poor countries. And if you disagree with that statement, very good. So I think we know where we are. I wanted just to establish a little bit the territory so that we don't go over old ground. We agree it's a useful framework. We agree we have to get to a deal by 2015. We agree that we want it to be linking as far as possible the poverty MDG plus and the sustainable development goals. We agree it should be universal, covering both developed and developing countries. And we think it's going to be difficult for a number of reasons to do with climate and to do with means of implementation and finance and global institutions, and for some other reasons we might discuss. So I think that's the place that I'd love us to start. And I'm going to ask each of the panel to speak for 5 minutes, and that will take us half an hour, and then we should have the best part of an hour really to test and challenge and take forward this agenda. And I want us to leave not just with an action program for other people, we should do that, but also with an action program for ourselves. So let's try and think, each of you, what's the one problem you can help to solve in getting to 2015, and what are you going to do when you get back that will take this forward? This is our panel. I'm delighted that we've got back President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, who's been an inspirational leader of her country, of course, and a great voice on all these issues. Jan Eliasson, who is the Deputy Secretary General of the UN, and actually the man on whose desk all these different processes come together. The post-2015 process, led by Amina Mohammed, the climate process, led by Christiana Figueres, the Hyogo disaster risk management process, led by Margareta Wallström. Who holds the reins? Actually, it's Jan Eliasson and Ban Ki-moon, and the image that came to me the other day is, I don't know whether you've seen the film of Ben-Hur. Ben-Hur driving the chariot with the 4 horses, racing round. Who holds the reins? Who is Ben-Hur? Well, it's either Jan Eliasson or it's Ban Ki-moon. They can share the job between them. I'm really pleased, of course, that Commissioner Piebalgs is here, given how much else he has on his agenda. He's done an amazing job as Development Commissioner, and I hope that he stays forever, but the chances are this is the last time we will have him at the European Development Days. And I think for that reason only, we should give him an early round of applause to thank him for his leadership. Then we have 3 other panelists. Sitting at the end, Deb Bhattacharya from Bangladesh, who's been a great leader on trade and development, on least developed countries, as a diplomat, a researcher, a policymaker, and a troublemaker. He's a friend of mine. I hope you don't mind me saying that, though. Winnie Byanyima, who is the Chief Executive of Oxfam International. Oxfam, an agency which is famous not just for doing good in the field, but for having a voice internationally. And finally, a very old friend, we were at university together, was it only 5 years ago, anyway, recently, Paul Collier. We were undergraduates at the same time in the 1960s. I saw him described in a pamphlet the other day as the guru on development, and that's certainly how I feel about him. That's not a complete quote, actually. You can look up what was actually said about him. But anyway, he's a guru on development, and he's made a huge contribution to thinking about, among other things, fragile states, natural resources management, and so on. This is the order of speaking, and perhaps halfway through we'll have a 30-second break so that you can talk to each other. But we're going to start with the President, then Jan Eliasson, and then Debra Priya, and then we'll come to the remaining speakers. I've asked them to speak for no more than 5 minutes, and to be really challenging and help us get to the conclusion we want to reach at the end of the session. Madam President. I think you should, please.
Let me start with the issue on which there seems to be a 100% consensus from the audience. That is the need for a post-2015 global agenda. We all know that the Millennium Development Goals had a process that ran a bit short of full consultations. Certainly in the African context, we felt that those consultations were not sufficient. However, the MDGs did become a unifying force around a set of time-bound indicators. And one have to say that they were by and large successful, that there's a lot of progress that's been made under the MDGs. However, for many countries, in Africa particularly, we have fallen short of achieving those goals. And certainly MDG goal number 8, which talk about partnership, one will have to say that expectations were not met. Now we were very pleased that the UN Secretary General decided that we should come together and make sure that collaboration that comes from the formulation of new goals was important. And so that's why he set up a 27-person panel of eminent persons to work on that. The process was very consultative. It involves research, analysis by regional institutions. It involved bringing together civil society organizations. It involved bringing the private sector for the first time, something that was unprecedented, to ensure that the proposed goals would meet or have the input of all. We believe that the report, which was submitted to the Secretary General, is bold, yet realistic, and achievable in keeping with the mandate that he gave to the panel. First of all, it was very clear that a successor regime must ensure that we do not take our eyes off the ball for the MDGs for the remaining period until 2015. And so everyone's encouraged to put extra effort to achieve as much as possible the MDG goals. Secondly, there are a set of indicators, but I think there's one thing that runs strongly in the successor regime, and that's the eradication of extreme poverty. The others are there, addressing youth employment, ensuring that not only do we have enrollment, but quality access to education, to healthcare, women empowerment. All of those are clearly laid out in the report. The report also addresses and integrates the agenda that came out of Rio +20 to make sure that we're not only talking about reduction of poverty, economic and social transformation, but environmental protection, protecting the planet, and ensuring through monitoring and evaluation that the process itself will be sustainable through a continuing process of assessment, through strengthening data systems to be able to evaluate. In Africa, we're still working on the African Common Position, coming out of our own regional institutions, the Economic Commission for Africa, the African Development Bank, to a certain extent, the United Nations Development Program. But one thing is very clear that we think will come out of the African Common Position is the social and economic transformation of Africa, with particular focus on youth unemployment, women empowerment, value addition for natural resources, infrastructure development, thereby bringing the missing links, interconnectivity, moving toward manufacturing and industrialization that have been lacking. The most difficult part, perhaps, in trying to get this consensus that is necessary is the negotiation that will take place among UN member countries. Now that the report is before them, the Secretary General reports, which to a large extent incorporates a lot of the high-level panel report. How will we make sure that every region feels like they're a part of it, they contributed to it, they will benefit from it? And I think the challenge there is to accept and see the successor regime as something representing one humanity, that they are common aspirations that touches all people, benefits all people, gives responsibilities to all people. That will be a challenge, knowing how our UN system works, but we're optimistic that it will be achieved. Thank you.
Thank you. As a practicing politician who's had to take some really tough decisions, and looking at this process, do you think that consultation and listening and talking is enough of a methodology, so to speak, to deliver a deal, or do there need to be incentives built in, financial or otherwise, that will make it possible to achieve a deal?
Consultation is important for getting consensus. And so that will make negotiations much easier. But still, everyone must feel that there's something in it for them, that it reflects their own priorities, that the responsibilities are mutual. And this is why I remain optimistic that through consultation, we will be able to adopt a successor regime.
Because, you know, in the earlier incarnations of all of this, going back to the original Rio and then actually the MDG Monterey, the Millennium Declaration of Monterey in 2000 and so, there was a kind of deal on the table, which was that developing countries would commit to very ambitious goals, provided there was a generous financing package on the table. Do you think that sort of thinking will go on this time?
No, this time it's different. Here we're talking about mutual responsibility, not a set of goals to which we commit, and in exchange, there is a donor that's giving funding to enable us. It's a different ballgame this time. We all commit to common goals for all humanity, and we all take responsibility to make sure that those goals are achieved from a combination of resources coming from all sides, okay. Partnership countries, member countries, and that's a big difference because that reflects, in the African context, the fact that we want ownership and we want to be able to determine our own destiny. So that's why we must be willing to pay for it.
Very good. Let me call Ben Hur, or otherwise known as Deputy Secretary General.
I thought you were going to say Banhur.
Well, you can share the job.
Thank you very much. First of all, thanks to Andres and the European Union Commission for organizing this. I think you should know that the European Union really makes a huge difference out there in the field. I've been traveling all over the world and seen European Union on the ground in both development, humanitarian action, and on conflict resolution. So you should be proud of your efforts, and they should be well known. We all stand for the same thing, don't we? That we want to prove that multilateralism works, and that multilateralism must be the key to global issues. I would hope that we, in the end, would come to the conclusion that a good international solution, a good international formula for one of these issues that we are faced with, migration, climate, whatever, this international solution is basically, in today's globalized world, a national interest. The good international solution is a national interest. We haven't reached that understanding in many cases, but that's what we have to do. And in this negotiation, it's about finding an international formula which in the end will turn out to be in the national interest. And that's why it's going to be a give and take. We're accepting universality, accepting the goals, and seeing to it that achieving those goals is in our national interest. Maybe not as it seems on the surface, short term, but in today's world they are. So that's why I think we have a daunting, difficult task ahead of us, but also an enormously inspiring task. Secretary General Ban Ki-moon says to me that this is his first priority. Come out with a good direction for development after 2015 is absolutely crucial for this world. And we have to take into account the new trends, the new global landscape which is there, so that United Nations and those who have to be on the side of the United Nations doing this are really making themselves relevant, and that these goals are seen as practical, measurable, and doable. Now, since you wanted us to not go through what is where you already have consensus, let me just mention a few challenges. One is to establish credibility in these, this bold yet practical set of goals or targets that we will decide by 2015. And as President Johnson Sirleaf just mentioned, where you laid a great basis with the high-level panel. Credibility, I think, will come from two things. One is that we are really serious about acceleration of the present MDGs. Some progress is made, particularly on education and a few other things, but very bad record on sanitation and maternal health, for instance. So there's a need to speed up the implementation of the present MDGs. The second area, which I think is important for credibility of that next step, next stage, is financing for development. There we have much work to do, and many actors need to be involved. There has to be, we may face the situation later on where there is a competition for resources between poverty eradication and climate change. I would hope that the private sector would get more involved in the climate change financing. But these two issues are important. Establish credibility that we are serious about this next stage, so that we can take those bold steps. MDG acceleration and financing for development. The second challenge that I see is that we have pretty well unity about the priority being given to poverty eradication, also that sustainability is an indispensable part of the next targets, also fighting poverty. But we don't have yet, in my view, unity of views that we need a quality development, which I think can be more quantifiable than people think, but that is the power and importance of institutions. If we don't have institutions that give stability to the process, if we don't have good legislation, if we don't have the rule of law in its different aspects, if we don't have the rights perspective, then we will lose a very important qualitative element. We may formulate very easily some of the poverty eradication goals, but we need to have that third element, apart from sustainability and poverty eradication, namely institution building. That might be more controversial, and I hope that it will be part of the negotiation, and that it will be a normal part of the discourse. I know from my own country, Sweden, which was one of the poorest countries in the world, no, in Europe, in the 1920s. What changed was three things. We built good infrastructure in the 30s. We got the right to education to all. I'm the first one to graduate, have more than 7 years of school in my mother's and father's family. And the third issue, my father told me, good, strong, honest, well-functioning institutions. So I hope that third element will be part of it. And then another last point is that these goals need also to be taken seriously by other actors. This is not a UN diplomatic exercise. It has to permeate other sectors of society and other sectors of government. If this set of goals is not taken seriously by finance ministers, by energy ministers, by agriculture ministers, by environmental ministers, then we haven't made sure that we have a strong safety net for it. We need to reach out with this work now and make this work also work for other sectors inside government, but also, of course, beyond the private sector, civil society, the academic world, many of you in this room. So we have a big exercise to make sure that these goals and targets, whenever they are formulated, that they will be meaningful on the global level, on the regional level, on the national level, and of course in the end on the local level. Otherwise this will not be the living concept which is necessary. So it's a huge task we have ahead of each other, but I would still say, a fascinating one with a slight element of masochism involved working with it. But I thank you for bringing this issue to this great audience. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm trying to resist the temptation to get excited and have a long conversation with each of you, which I would like to do. But just very quickly, some people think that the climate issue is toxic for the post-2015, partly because it's on a different timetable. Do you agree, and what do we do about it? And secondly, when you talk about institutions, is this a code for the donor community being more aggressive about human rights and democracy in developing countries?
Well, first question, toxic. It's a fact that we have this huge issue. We cannot disregard. But I don't think we should we shouldn't mix the two these huge two negotiations. It could hurt both of them. We will touch upon it when we talk about the third element of sustainability. You have social sustainability, economic and environmental, of course, and the environmental will connect to the climate change issues. But I would hope that they will not be negotiated in parallel, because then we might get stuck in a very, very dangerous situation. The only area where I see danger is competition of resources, because there's going to be a need for $100 billion every year from 2020 on climate change. Similarly, I suppose, on poverty eradication. And if we see a competition at that stage, then it's bad news. That's why I think the private sector, not only World Bank, not only the banks, by the way, not only World Bank, but also the private sector like pension funds, equity funds, should realize it's a good business to invest in climate change issues, like renewable energy. I can't understand why that is not, as the bankers say, bankable. So that's it's not toxic, but it's a fact of life. We have to accept it, but don't mix the two negotiations. The second question is no. Well, yes, you may give your impression human rights is, of course, part of rule of law, but, you know, there is so much. Do you know that almost 1 billion people don't exist formally? They don't have birth certificates. They don't have a chance to open a bank account. They can't prove that they can vote. I think the figure that I heard last is 900 million people who don't exist. That's the rule of law. Give them rights, give them their existence back. Give them proof that they exist. Can you imagine? And that is that not quantifiable, by the way? Anti-corruption. Let's face it, it's a huge issue. Legislation for that. So all this, and then of course, post-conflict institutions, so that you don't fall back into terror of the terrible situation of Somalia, Afghanistan. Present problem in Libya now, by the way, is that after Gaddafi, there were no institutions left, and so there is chaotic conditions. So I would really hope that institution building is part of that work that we have ahead. Otherwise, we lose that strength, structure, and stability of the efforts.
Thank you very much. You may want to come back on some of these questions, and please don't hesitate to do so in a few minutes. Deb, what's missing, and how do we get to a deal?
Thank you, Simon. Let me first thank the organizers of the European Development Days for inviting me over here. And this is a great opportunity to share the platform with very eminent people. Now, Simon, with your voting, you did create an illusion about the consensus or the overall, I think, convergence of views. I think with the earlier two interventions from the President and the Deputy Secretary General, I think we now have the clue that there are also tensions involved. To start with, notwithstanding all the consultations, and I will be very telegraphic given that you have given me so little time. And so the first one is the participation deficit. Notwithstanding all the consultations which are taking place and everything else, whether you take the government process or you take the non-government process or the private sector and others, there had been serious participation deficit shortfall, I would say, on the part of the developing economies and particularly the low-income countries. The reason why the participation shortfall was there because they suffer from capacity deficit. That is the fact. Not only money, but also human resources to deal with the specialized subject. And last but not the least, this also explains why there is a knowledge asymmetry in this world. and whose knowledge we are going to use in terms of framing these issues and how we are going to monitor them and then implement them and deliver. So I see these three critical problems which are still afflicting that. And if you deconstruct your consensus, you will see there are hard choices involved, painful trade-offs are there, painful adjustment processes are involved. Let me highlight 3 points and to conclude at this opening statement. The first one, well, we all agree that there will be we need an outcome, we need a post-2015. But will it be ambitious enough? That is the point. You see, the point is whether the post-2015 will bring about any transformative change. The word is transformative change. So what are the indicators of the transformative change? So one of the indicators would be, will it be ambitious enough to deal with not only the hardcore poor, 1.25 per PPP dollars, but minimum $2 per day. With $1.25, I won't get a bus ride by 2030. You see, that is the level of ambition we are talking about. And I know how hard it is to reach the last mile, but nonetheless, this is an issue. The issue is inequality has figured very strongly. Which inequality we are talking about? Structural inequality, policy-induced inequality, or it is induced by the global governance, how it induces those kind of things. So I think there is an ambition issue is a major one. The second one, will it be balanced enough? You see, the questions, there are trade-offs, obviously trade-off. The issue is the balance between the rights and obligations. Madam President mentioned that it is a mutually responsible one, but the ability to carry the responsibilities are very different. So will there be common goals with different responsibilities? In how do you enshrine that? Will there be a balance between the new goals and the old goals, the unfinished agenda and the new one? Will there be enough balance between the three pillars of the sustainable development, economic, social, and environmental? I don't see as it over there. And will there be balance between the national reforms and the global reforms? You mentioned code word for human rights. I see it is a code word for reforming the global institutions, World Bank, IMF, United Nations, UN, and maybe EU too. I think this is a time to think about those two. My last point is, it can be ambitious, it can be balanced, but it may not be endowed enough. The issue is not a bit about finance. The issue is about beyond ODA we are talking about. ODA is important, people should keep their commitment, but it will not be enough. So we are talking about domestic resource mobilization. We are talking about, when we talk about domestic resource mobilization, will we be talking about illicit financial flows from the developing countries? Will we be talking about taxation, the tax havens and the money laundering which are taking place, and the concealed assets in Europe from Asia and Africa? So the issue is whether what we are going to talk about. And obviously, will there be efficiency gains from improving the global world order as it functions? We now know today possibly there will be no deal in the Bali, in the 9th Ministerial Conference of WTO. The multilateral trading system is breaking up. We don't have a financial architecture. Finance, climate, detoxification of climate financing and change discussion is going nowhere. And we hope to have it within the UN. I think this is very, 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 very difficult choices we will have. So my final point is that at the end of the day, we will definitely need a substantive and an inclusive outcome. But for us, the transparency and the accountability framework for that to deliver is no less important over there. Thank you for the time.
Well done, Devapriya. Thank you very much. I'm going to give the audience the opportunity of an elevator moment. You know what an elevator moment is. You get in the lift, and there is President Obama or President Johnson Sirleaf or Jan Eliasson, and you have about 25 seconds before you arrive at your destination to say one thing. Actually, I'm going to give you the chance to say two things. And the two things are these. Please don't agree a deal unless, complete that sentence. Please don't agree a deal unless, and this is the one thing you must do to get a deal. And I want you to talk to your neighbor for 2 minutes and answer that question, those two questions, and I will then call 2 or 3 people, but really quickly, because we don't want to lose the opportunity of talking to the other 3 panelists.
Simon, don't complete the deal if it is not ambitious enough, balanced enough, and endowed enough.
Okay. Talk to your neighbor, please. 2 minutes, and I'm then going to call a few people to give us their views. Sorry, but it's... they should. Actually, the problem is that there are 3 horses we've got. Climate, post-2015, and disasters. And bloody hell, Ben-Hur had 4 horses. So I'm looking for another horse. People have been sitting for 2 days and they don't have any participation at all. You know, so. Okay, the elevator's arrived. If you can do it in literally 30 to 40 seconds, I want 6 people to say something, and I'm going to move around the room. Somebody over in that area over there, put your hand up if you'd like to say what you decided. Okay, well come, yes, please. Take a microphone, stand up, 30 seconds, starting now.
Yes, so we discussed and we thought that it would be important not to make a deal if the international community is not also engaging in the process for development in terms of equality and hold into account in how it progresses towards that direction. Sharing basically, it's a mutual, I really agree with the fact that yes, it's a mutual responsibility. The North countries, the rich countries have a responsibility in the problem of development, and they should be held into account, and they should, yes, and there should be indicators to measure the progress. Thank you.
Very good, thanks so much. Somebody over here, hand up if you'd like to contribute. Yes, gentleman with the white hair there. You look as though you might be nearly 64 and a half. You can vote.
Oh, thank you, because I'm grey hair. Now, please don't agree if not all stakeholders are committed, because we always like to talk about other people, but we should talk with all people.
And how do we know if people are committed?
To engage with them.
What?
To engage with the people, to make them part of the process.
Okay.
North, south, east, west, black, white, all.
Very good. Somebody there, yes, please. Microphone over here.
Thank you. Don't do a deal unless you have the private sector involved. When you asked the participants this afternoon to raise their hands, you asked, I believe, employees of the European Union, World Bank, et cetera, the different.
Sorry.
You did not include the private sector. I think it's exemplary of how should I say, a certain thinking, and the private sector needs to be involved. There's been a lot of talk of this today. In my 25 seconds, I would say, please, think about the private sector, because governments don't give jobs, the private sector does.
Very good. You know, I work on business and development, I apologize. Okay, yes, please.
Don't do a deal unless there's stronger goals on sanitation. I think the report is very good about not thinking about this in terms of aid. And I believe there are thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of jobs that can be created in Africa, in Europe, in America by building sanitation, by building toilets, by building all of the necessary things for sanitation. We can create thousands of jobs around the world and deal with sanitation and give people and truly eradicate extreme poverty.
Okay, thank you very much. One more, we'll take somebody right at the back there. Right at the back.
Thank you. Please do not agree a deal unless you know how you're going to finance it. It's very important to ensure that there's a mix of resources that are harnessed to actually finance the post-2015 development agenda, and it's great to know how you're going to do that. Thank you.
That's a very interesting point. We'll take one more at the front, and then that'll be it.
please don't accept the deal if there is any sign of ambiguity. It's not sufficient also only the ambitions of the goals. Unless the local communities are here, because yet we are passing to the Sustainable Development Goals, and we have local community who has never even heard about the Millennium Development Goals. Unless you bridge this gap, don't accept the deal.
Okay, thank you. Lots of contributions on equality and participation and voice, which is convenient because Winnie is the next speaker. Some interesting thoughts about, of course, the stakeholders should be involved and about we should be ambitious in the targets. And I think a very interesting point at the back, that if we want to get a deal, there has to be money on the table. And how much money and where's it going to come from and who's going to get it. When we have more and more middle-income countries that don't qualify for aid, we might come back to that question with the last two speakers. Winnie, you're next.
Thanks. Maybe let me go straight to three things that we are concerned from civil society where we're not seeing a consensus evolving. One has been expressed here is the issue of addressing inequality in its many dimensions. There's the high-level panel report made some very strong proposals on gender inequality, and we agree with that. But we would like to see within that global framework a specific goal on income inequality. We think we need to make progress there. Inequality is not just morally repugnant, but it's bad for social and economic progress. That's well established. So we need to make some progress on that as well, plus all the other areas of inequality. Second, we have to live within planetary boundaries. So we're seeing very little progress in the climate talks. Just last week in Poland, we saw governments not being leaders. Some of them were even going back, reneging on emission targets they had agreed to earlier. So we need this agreement, this global compact, to be the political mobilizer that will lead us towards a legally binding treaty in the COP process. So we would like to see emission targets within this agreement, within the Global Compact on Development. We would like to see commitments on resources for adaptation so that poor countries that need to lift their people out of poverty are supported to adapt to a changing climate. That should be a commitment in this framework too, so that it sends a signal that we also get a binding treaty. Third, financing, the bottom line. Totally associate with the comments by Deb that ODA is important, it's good, but it's dwindling and it can't be enough to finance these ambitious goals. We have to tackle illicit financial flows. And this means in the North and in the South having commitments in this compact that will take us forward on this issue. In the North, we want to see tax havens closing. We want to see commitments on country-by-country reporting, not just in the extractives, but across all the areas of activity of corporations. We want to see more information that comes out, not just we paid so much to country X. Yes, but give us more detail. We want to see more information about what profits you made, how many employees you had, so that we can see whether you did pay the fair share of your taxes. So we need these commitments in this agreement. We need also to put in something about new and innovative sources of financing. What about a carbon tax on international shipping? Can't we have that there as well? What about a financial transaction tax? Some progress is happening here in Europe, but it won't go far unless it is really a global instrument because it creates unevenness in global markets. So that's an opportunity to raise money for development. And lastly, accountability. This global compact will not achieve the goals that will be there unless it's a people's compact. Unless there are clear accountability mechanisms that allow ordinary people in their organizations to hold their leaders, whether government leaders or business leaders, accountable to the goals. So, clear accountability mechanisms so that where I come from, in a poor country like Uganda, that poor women and poor men will know what commitments were made and can go to their local government and demand accountability. Thank you.
You know, I want to ask you a private question. Nobody's listening. You're a campaigning organization as well as a policy analysis organization. So you come to this meeting and you call for a global Gini coefficient and a national Gini coefficient, a lot of new financing, reform the World Bank, the IMF, the Security Council, the General Assembly, and ECOSOC, make sure we have emissions targets agreed outside the COP, which go into the goals. Will there come a point at which you would really try to stop an agreement if it didn't do all those things? Or are you campaigning now early in order to try and change the mood and you will retreat in August 2015?
Absolutely. We just walked out of the COP in Warsaw. 800 of us from social movements said, we can't stay here and see government leaders walking back on what they had even committed earlier. Certainly, we are going to mobilize civil society across the world, in the rich north and in the developing countries, to insist that we are roasting and action needs to happen. We will refuse to be party to unambitious goals. We will refuse to be party to partial goals that resolve the problem only halfway. So we want an ambitious agenda, and we will use our moral voice, we will use our mobilization power to say no and to protest.
Okay. Just in the room, never mind what constituency you come from or how old you are, a very strong position from both Deb and Winnie about being very demanding of this agreement, that it goes even further than the high-level panel, actually, in many ways. Hands up if you agree with that. And hands up if you don't. Very good. You should stand by for some fireworks, and we might hear what you think about that a bit later on. Paul.
Thanks. I was going to talk about the potential train crash between the sort of environmental goals and the poverty goals. My little book, The Plundered Planet, the subtitle was How to Reconcile the Environment with Prosperity. So I've tried to think through that. And I think it takes some intellectual movement on both sides. And in the book, I tried to distinguish between...
Which book? Remind us.
This is The Plundered Planet. I tried to distinguish between being curators of nature and being custodians of nature. And what I argued was we're not curators of nature. There's a radical fringe of the environmentalist movement that literally seems to want to preserve the earth as it is, regardless of the consequences for human beings. And that seems to me ridiculous. That is bound to conflict with the people's legitimate goals of wanting to be prosperous. And so I distinguish between curatorship, which is where the governments of poor countries are expected to put nature in a glass case and lock the case and just stand there as guards, as curators. I distinguish between that and being custodians of nature. Now, custodians, we are there to preserve the value in nature. Sometimes that will mean preserving nature as it is, keep forests forests. Sometimes it will mean digging up nature and burning it. But because we are custodians of the value of natural assets, if we dig it up and burn it, we better replace it with some assets that are equal value and more productive. And the unifying concept there, which covers both the environmental domain and the economic domain, is the concept of stewardship. We need to be good stewards of nature. Now, that means being good stewards of natural assets and good stewards who avoid the accumulation of natural liabilities. And there's the unifying concept, is good stewardship. And just to return to where we started with, that requires a new class of institutions. You know, so when Sweden developed, and when the rest of the rich world developed, we were fortunate in not confronting a lot of trade-offs between the present and the distant future. Our whole budget cycle in democracies is annual. And our governments never think beyond 5 years, right? An average of 2.5 years. Right? And so our institutions that we built are very good at trade-offs within a year, should we do that or that, but very bad at trade-offs between the present and the future. And we've got to build those institutions for both types of issue. The poor countries that are sitting on valuable natural resources, I very much hope President Johnson Sirleaf finds herself sitting on offshore oil. If she does, she's well aware that she will need institutions which manage that oil depletion in a way that builds a legacy for the future. I mean, look at a country that I've worked with, Zambia, which went through the whole copper cycle, got down by 2002 to no copper of any value. And I remember a Zambian saying to me, now the copper's gone, what are our children going to say about us? Because Zambia went through that whole copper cycle and didn't build a future. Zambia's been lucky. The copper price went up. They've just in the last 10 years discovered a load more copper. They're just at the start of a second chance. But if history's not to repeat itself, countries like Zambia need institutions which manage between the present and the future. The world as a whole needs new institutions that manage that trade-off between the present and the future with our natural liabilities. At the moment, just as we're running down our natural assets without leaving a legacy, we're running up our natural liabilities in the form of carbon. The same conceptual issue, both for the environment and for getting out of poverty, the same challenge of building these institutions which navigate the future. So that's my plea, really, is to see the unity in these apparently disparate issues and see the unity in the solution, these long-term institutions.
Give us an example of an institution that would do this for us.
The thing I've been advocating for a lot of poor countries is what I call sovereign development funds. I call them sovereign development funds to distinguish from sovereign wealth funds. Sovereign wealth funds are very fashionable. They are to the present generation what national airlines were in the 1960s. Every poor country wants a sovereign wealth fund. But if it just means doing what Norway does, that's really dumb. Because what Norway does, which is very sensible for Norway, is use the revenues from its natural resources to build up financial assets abroad. That's the sovereign wealth fund. Makes a lot of sense for Norway because it's already got more invested capital per worker than any other country in the world. And so Norway will get a better return on capital in China or Brazil than in Norway. But if we're Liberia, we ain't Norway. You're not at the position of having more capital per member of your labor force than anywhere else in the world. You've got less. And so the priority is to use those revenues to build a future, but build them by investing in the country. That's why I call them sovereign development funds, not sovereign wealth funds, to distinguish that concept.
We've got 25 minutes. I would like, of course, to hear Andris Piebalgs. Then I want to have a few minutes just to get some quick reactions from you, and then give the panel a couple of minutes each at the end, but it will be very brief because we want to finish on time, and we started a little bit late. I mean, I think we're coming down to this question about what's the scale of ambition? How realistic is it to set the targets even higher than those that the high-level panel gave us? And what are the practical politics of having something on the table in 2015 that is worth having, both on the MDG side and on the climate side? And that's why I'm really glad that you're going to speak last, Andris, because actually you're somebody who has a really good overview of these issues and also understands the politics of getting from A to B.
Well, I wish I would be in the situation, because permanently I'm challenged with the question, does it make sense, Commissioner, what you are doing? And I'm always trying to find the best possible answer, why it really matters that we think a bit more beyond, I would say, my household's borders or my national state borders. And the answer perhaps are always felt when there's tragedies, or it is in Philippines, or it's in Latvia and Bangladesh. Then you feel the sympathies of people. People really care about other people being happy and prosperous. But they care only about the people they know. They care about tragedies they know. And Jan Eliasson said they definitely don't know that 1 billion doesn't exist at all. And that brings this political responsibility for the people who know more. People that do more and really try to build a scheme that will not leave anybody out of it. The world today is built, for better or worse, on the basis of national states and statehoods. Whatever you would like to achieve, you can't bypass national statehood. That basically means elections, government, accountability to the voters. I think that is definitely a limitation of any global model, because you need that everybody accepts its framework as it owns. And there's only one system that accommodates, it's UN system. There is no alternative. Neither G8, neither G20, neither whatever the number we make could replace this. So that leads us that any framework would be very well needed. Then we could go and look what MDG framework did. And actually for me, MDG framework did something remarkable because it shaped national policies. It shaped national policies to the extent, but still it made. And I make an example, perhaps Ethiopia would have done without it. This number of children, because I know the figures, that I mentioned this example. In Ethiopia, 1990, there have been more than 200 deaths of newborns out of, well, thousands that have been born. So basically, each fifth child had no chance to live until the age of 5 years. Today, the figure is 60. Why it was possible? Because government focused, and there have been definitely donor support that allowed really to make steps. And the change is enormous. The lives has been influenced, but it would never really happen if the national policy wouldn't be focused on it. So no funding could replace it. So for me, that is crucial that the framework that is being built is very much built on strengths on MDG framework. And for me, the strengths are that it is unique, universal political framework, that there is political financial attention, and that is simple, measurable, easy, communicable framework. So that, I believe, is the strength that we would like to achieve when also looking at it. And I see from the questions you ask, Simon, that everybody agrees that it should be single framework, because we go beyond just the lowest billion. So we go for, it's very clear, it should be single and universal. But the details, how to shape it out, I think should not we have less ambition than we have had in MDG framework. And I still am always a bit humbly promote the high-level panel reports that President Johnson Sirleaf has chaired. Well, you could disagree with goals formulated. You can disagree with target formulated. But the methodology is good, because it's exactly what, in my opinion, is needed. And now the next step is really to convince that it is a framework that serves me, that serves my country. And that perhaps is the most difficult process. And the event like Development Days basically tries to convince each of its participants that there is no hidden agenda. There is no traps. There is no, well, trying to push responsibilities. It's basically about the basic element of our world. It's about each human being that is being born or will be born and will be living there. And that I think we need somehow try to now interpret in the government frameworks that will shape their policies universally all across the world. And that's why also we come to the conclusion you can't separate me as a consumer from one side and the protection of environment from other side. I am still the same. I can't have dual personality. I have single personality, at least I think so. So I believe that it is a process that we have moved quite far, I believe. It's a trust needed. Trust and definitely scientific knowledge, how you formulate, how you measure, and how you make yourself accountable.
Brilliant, thank you very much. How do you feel about this? Do you feel really positive we can do it? Do you feel worried it's going to be difficult? Do you think we should close it down, or should we open it up at this point? What do we have to do, really, to get the deal? I'd like to take 5 people, and you have a minute each maximum, and at least half of them should be under 30. 2 there, and then we'll have some from the other sides. You don't look under 30, but that's okay. Please speak. Maybe you are under 30. Really, really quick, please. Stand up.
I'm not under 6.5 foot tall, if that's any help. I wanted to ask if all of the panel agree that we can't have a framework that doesn't tackle the issue of violence and set people free from violence. And I know that Madam Johnson Sirleaf has worked extremely hard to convince other countries of this need. Do you believe it's possible? How do we get there?
Okay, thanks so much. Somebody 2 down from you, 3 down from you.
Thank you very much. I'm Mark West. I'm with UNESCO in Paris. I just wanted to push back to the consensus building around ambitious being the operative word. We just finished up a 15-year perspective, and we didn't do it. We didn't do it on any of the goals, and certainly not in education. I just came back from a mission to Nigeria. We promised students there that all primary age students could go to school. We have 10.5 million students who are out of school in Nigeria. That's more than there were in 2000. We're going to lose credibility if we continue to set goals we cannot meet. So I think maybe instead of ambitious, we replace that with doable and modest.
Shouldn't goals be stretching?
Agreed, but if we continue to not reach the goals, they become meaningless.
Very good. Somebody under 30 and female over there, somebody speak? Or not female, or not under 30? Yes? You don't meet either criterion, do you?
Yeah, in the absence of any of these criteria. Hubert Perr, European Commission, DG Europaid. One of the points that have been missing in the otherwise very inspiring debate was the role and hopefully as well the responsibility of the emerging markets, especially the BRICS, in this universal consensus that should be built. And I think it would be interesting to hear a few more words. What do you expect from China, from Brazil, from India, South Africa in this global agenda?
What do you think they should do? What's the problem we're trying to solve?
I think we need to bring them into the agenda. We need to make them equally accountable as development partners now, rather than as being recipients of development aid.
Okay, that's good. BRICS must be accountable. I'm not going to stand here and not have anybody under 30 speak in this session. Yes, one, and a lady at the back. Last two, very quickly, and then we'll have the panel.
Hi, good afternoon. My name's Tim Crocker-Buquet. I'm a doctor from the UK. The point that I wanted to make was I was encouraged to hear Paul talk about new international institutions. I don't think that we can agree a new framework where you can get treatment if you have the right disease or belong to the right demographic group, whereas huge numbers of people with different diseases and from different demographic groups can't access healthcare. If we continue to select on that basis, we let down huge sections of society.
Okay, that means possibly no more vertical funds. We were in a meeting in Davos, Jan, when somebody said to us, the next big disease in Africa will be breast cancer. Do we need a vertical fund for breast cancer? Woman at the back, last voice.
Hi, my name's Jessica Beagley, and I work for a health NGO in Brussels. And I'd like to ask the panel, linked to the last point, actually, where they see non-communicable diseases featuring in the post-2015 development agenda. So non-communicable diseases like diabetes, cancer, heart disease, lung diseases like emphysema and asthma didn't feature in the MDGs at all. And there are 382 million people in the world that have diabetes. And it's not to belittle HIV and AIDS at all, but that's 10 times the number of people that have HIV and AIDS. And the focus on non-communicable diseases is completely disproportionate. I heard today as well that there are more people with cancer than with malaria, HIV, and tuberculosis combined. And it's not just a problem in developing nations. There are 80% of the people in the world with diabetes live in low and middle-income countries, and 70% of people in the world with cancer live in low and middle-income countries. And it just seems like a huge priority that's being missed, and I wonder if you do see it featuring in the post-2015
Very good question. Thank you. I'm going to go along the panel, and I think I'll just do it in the order in which you're sitting, except I'll give Mr. Piebalgs the last word. Do we open it up or do we close it down? You know, what's your advice on how to get there by 2015? Deb, you weren't listening, were you? You were.
No, my point would be obviously to open it up as much as possible within the planetary boundaries, what you call. So definitely more involvement, more engagement, and many other things. But listening, since it is the closing moment, and listening to everybody, and I would like to emphasize two particular points. As you open up, what are the issues that you like to emphasize? You see, I fully agree with the colleagues who have mentioned about finance to be put on table before, and the forms of finance and everything, including bringing the bricks in and making them accountable to build the wall. So that's fine. But still, what is important from our point of view as a community coming from analytical and academic background is that volume is important, but the quality is more important. At the end of the day, flow is important, but its effectiveness is more important. If you look at the financial flows or non-financial means of implementation of MDGs, you will see a serious lack of coherence amongst that. Coordination was a major challenge, both on one UN concept or at the country level coordination and many other things. And with a universal framework and country priorities, it will be a hazardous exercise of extreme dimension. So my point is that it is the quality of the resources, the quality of the outcome. The education issue is a very clear telling circumstance. We brought all the students into the school. Now they come out, but they cannot read or write. Yep. So, and my last point over there at the second part is that we may all agree on regarding reforms, new institutions within the country and everything else, but we will have to recognize we need a systemic change. If we do not recognize the need for systemic change, the transformative agenda, without a systemic change in the way we do trade, the way we do finance, the way we do intellectual property right, the transfer of technology, climate change, financing, without those things, I don't think post-MDG will take us very far. But I will also expect that this doesn't mean the national government will pass on everything to the global institutions and shy away from its own responsibility and its own citizens. Thank you.
All right. Let's not clap, everybody, because otherwise we've got about 9 minutes. So please time your thoughts accordingly. Winnie.
Okay. Well, poverty, hunger, illiteracy, disease, all these are not technical problems. They are deeply political. And it's going to take political will to resolve them. We have to look at this as issues of justice. If we look at this as a framework with targets, with indicators, with resources, and have thousands of people solving this technically, we will not get there. The world has made big changes by having the political will. Slavery was ended, colonialism was ended, apartheid was ended, because people all over the world said, it's repugnant, it's immoral, it must stop. This is the same. We cannot have a world where people wallow in wealth and others are scratching for an existence and dying of hunger. We can't have a world where we are roasting the planet, we are consuming to such an extent that there's no future for our kids, and we don't call ourselves immoral. So let us have that political will to end social injustice.
Okay,
then we will get there.
Thank you.
A consultative process is open, and everyone's welcome to be a part of it. We recognize that managing the trade-off will not be easy, that it will lead to hard choices. For example, Africa may stress infrastructure development. Latin America may stress reform in consumption patterns. We will need to see how we find a way to integrate both of those in an agenda. Secondly, the stakeholders this time involve everybody. The private sector is involved. Civil society is involved. And so if one needs to go beyond that by making sure that this participation deficit is addressed, then we need to know how we address it, because the idea here is to make everyone a stakeholder in this so that everyone feels a part of it, everyone feels it belongs to them, and everyone will benefit and take responsibility for it. On the financing, we do agree with the decision of the G8 that this involves trade, and we want better trade, particularly for the poorer countries, the developing countries. That could very well include stemming illicit flows. We do want to see taxes paid. That's part of the G8 agenda, and we do want to see transparency to make sure that everyone knows what resources are coming and how it's being spent. So the process is open to you for suggestion, open to everybody for suggestion. Would like for everybody to be a part of this and to get on board so that this new agenda will really represent everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Jan Eliasson.
Well, I'm glad we got political will into the discussion, and we have to go back to basic values, the UN Charter, everything that is really the whole soul of international solidarity, international cooperation. But I would claim also that we must see inequalities, which this is basically all about, as not only being unfair, but also being very dangerous. In other words, you need to both appeal to what is right, but also what is important for you to survive. And I think that's how we can really reach a strong constituency, if this is built on a long-term conclusion of what we have to do for the future. So that, again, is another way of saying what I said in the very beginning. The international solution is the national interest. That's the same thing. Now, what I think we have to really watch out for when we take the next step is that we don't forget that we will have a lot of unfinished business. And we leave that behind and sort of look for these new, innovative, new direction to go. We have a lot of unfinished business. this glass of water is a luxury for 768 million people, and 2.5 billion people don't have sanitation. 2,000 children die every day in diarrhea, dysentery, dehydration, and I've seen them die in front of my own eyes. That's why I'm committed so much to the sanitation issue. So you have this unfinished business, which has a horizontal way of acting. The problem with the MDGs is that they are vertical. In fact, they are in practice horizontal, because if you do sanitation, education, or promoting women, you have effects on all over the other goals. The other thing is that the challenge is, yes, don't forget the unfinished business, but then secondly, let us also see the new world. We have a new global landscape which we have to adapt to. You have the communication and information explosion. You have the enormous power of migration. You have urbanization. You have the youth unemployment. You have a number of new factors, and they also we have to analyze those so that we have a method of letting the international community act on these issues, involving everybody. Nobody can do everything, but everybody can do something. We set the goal for the high-level panel. When we wrote this terms of reference for Ellen and Andres and others, we said, you should be ambitious, but then we added, yet practical. That was, you said, doable. So here's the balance. We have to keep that ambition, because we are in a hurry in this world. But they have to also be practical. And the practicality comes from not forgetting the unfinished business, but also adapting to this new world. And if we don't adapt to that, then international institutions will be less relevant. So we have a huge task ahead of us, still daunting, but I hope we'll still agree that it is inspiring. And for me, this discussion today has been inspiring. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Paul.
Thank you. I think what I want to say is sort of broadly similar to what Winnie was suggesting. I want to ask, in getting behavior change, and that's what we're talking about, behavior change, there are two ways of going about it. One is basically accountability, and the other is internalization of objectives. Now, I think it's a case of horses for courses. Back in the summer, I was the advisor for the G8 development agenda, and there I felt with these G8 countries, the right approach was accountability for rather clear, specific changes, all of which were eminently doable by the countries themselves, and so you just wanted to get them to agree to it and then come back in 2 years' time and check that they'd done it. So accountability. But the UN global goals seem to me not really to lend themselves to that same accountability framework, that we got a lot more goals than we loaded up with the G8. And what Winnie said, I think, sounds right, that if you festoon those goals with sub-goals and monitorable this and monitorable that and accountability processes, it all drowns. Whereas what the UN is really good for is to change norms. And in my lifetime, and A40 and Simon, since he's older than I am, we've seen some dramatic changes in norms. When we were young, when we were young, if Simon had taken a cigarette out and smoked it, we wouldn't have thought a thing about it. But if he'd said, me and my boyfriend, that would have been the end of the, you'd have been frozen out. And now it's the opposite. It's just taken 50 years, right? And that's a radical change in norms. Now, we need changes in norms, as Winnie was suggesting. The norm I spoke about was stewardship, that it's really important that we develop a norm of stewardship for the future. Somebody in the audience suggested violence. There's a very good book by Steve Pinker, the social psychologist, called The Better Angels of Our Nature, which is about the dramatic change in violent behavior in the high-income countries over the last couple of hundred years. The norm of behavior towards violence radically changed. But it hasn't been globalized yet, and that's what needs to happen, a global change in the norms towards violence. So I would appeal that we shouldn't lose the spirit of the UN shifting global norms in a plethora of accountable targets. And then we get into the worries of this trade-off of if they're ambitious, we'll miss them. If they're unambitious, what's the point?
Okay, thanks very much. I'm going to ask Andris to complete the panel and also to close the development day. So just before I do, three things. First of all, we're managing a project to deliver this thing by 2015. And it does seem to me, and I've written about this on my website, that the big challenge is to know when to open it up and when to close it down and how to be practical and realistic about the politics. And I've written about the Goldilocks issues, the ones that are not too easy and not too difficult, but are just right from this big selection that we've heard that we can actually get done by 2015. And I think it's helpful to all of us to really think about, of course, the moral imperative and the passion, but also the practicalities of getting it done, number one. Number two, this meeting doesn't end in 5 minutes when Andris has finished speaking, because I said earlier on, each of you has a responsibility. And I would love it if we could hand out pieces of paper and ask you, each of you, what commitment you're going to make to deliver this. But we can't do that. There are some alternatives. You could tweet #EDD13 and tell the world not what you think, but what you're going to do. Or you could use @EU Development Days, or if there's a website for the EDDs, you could post something to that. There are probably, 300 people in the room. Let's try and get 300 contributions by tomorrow night. That's your homework, by tomorrow night. Thirdly, a final vote. I want to know from you, having heard this discussion and all these extremely important contributions, are you optimistic about post-2015? Put your hands up if you are. Put your hands up if you're not. Okay, there are some people who are, I think, rightly worried about some things, but the overwhelming mood is that the leadership we've had from this team has led us to a place where we can be positive about what we can do. Thank you very much.
Can I give an answer to whether I'm an optimist or pessimist? I said I am basically an optimist, but I worry a lot.
Andris.
Well, there are two things that I need still to do. First, I would like to thank our guests, particularly you, President, Prime Minister, ministers, but also all of our partner country representatives. Without your will to come here and discuss, it will be empty discussion. So thank you very much. Second, we can applaud. Second, I really am proud about the teams that worked preparing development days. Because it's not only technical arrangements, it's also concept, freedom, new ideas. And I would like to thank Stina Suvarta particularly. I will ask her on stage and name also people that she worked with. But I would also mention 3 other names before Stina will be speaking. It is definitely Director General Fernando Frutuoso de Mello, Deputy Director General Klaus Rudischhauser. I think both of them are doing other duties. And then my member of cabinet, Catherine Ray, that also helped a lot. And now, Stina, please name others, because otherwise I will miss somebody, and I would like to pass you this responsibility.
Thank you, Commissioner. President, Deputy Secretary General, Ministers, Deputy Prime Minister, thank you so much. This is a completely unexpected honor, and this is not an honor that goes to me. It's an honor that goes to a team under the leadership of Annie Martinez Alonso, in great collaboration with 3 other colleagues. I should say they're all women, and they have shown both the practical and the conceptual side of this. My thanks also goes to all the colleagues in DG DEFCO, in particular in the Development Policy Unit, where the colleagues have been extraordinarily generous with the work, but also to all the other parties in the European Commission, DG Climate, DG Environment, the External Action Service, the European Parliament. It also goes to our contractant this year, Media Consulta, who's done a great job in putting all of this together. It goes to all the civil society organizations. We have had 700 organizations represented here. It has been a unique experience. This edition has been the size of the 2 previous ones put together. One last thanks goes to all our youth ambassadors, the winners of the video competition, the youth ambassadors who's been willing here to gather and to discuss with us, to challenge, I think, a lot of you in the panels. The last and final thank you, of course, goes to the boss, Commissioner Piebalgs. Thank you so much for entrusting me with this job. Thank you.
Thank you, Stina. And that was it. Thank you very much. And development days are now closed. Thank you.